Some nights the forest doesn't sleep. The branches creak, the ground shifts, and something starts moving just beyond the firelight. Welcome back to True Cryptid Archives. This time the trail led somewhere we didn't expect, and what we found wasn't human. If you've ever looked into the woods and felt watched, hit like. If you want to keep going deeper, hit subscribe. I remember that night as clearly as if it were yesterday. It was October 12th, 1997, and the chill in the air made my breath mist as I moved deeper into DeSoto National Forest. I'd been out since late afternoon, hoping to track a deer before the peak of the season. The woods were quiet. Too quiet, I realized as I stopped for a moment to listen. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The moon hung low, a pale crescent barely breaking through the thick canopy. My lantern's weak glow cast long shadows, and I kept my bow ready as I followed a faint game trail that wound between towering pines and patches of marshy ground. Something about the air felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. That's when I heard it, the growl, low, guttural, and far too deep to be a dog. It rumbled through the air, vibrating in my chest. I froze, gripping my bow so tightly my knuckles ached. My first thought was a bear, but this didn't sound like any bear I'd ever heard. There was something unnatural about it, like it was more than just a sound. It was a warning. I turned slowly, shining my lantern toward the direction of the noise. That's when I saw them, two glowing amber eyes staring back at me from the darkness. They weren't the reflective kind you see in deer or raccoons. These eyes burned almost like coals, and they seemed to cut through the shadows. My stomach dropped. Then it stepped into the light. The thing was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, and it walked upright on 2 legs. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, but the structure was all wrong. Its arms were too long, its chest unnaturally broad, and its clawed hands flexed like it was itching to use them. The head, though, was unmistakably wolf-like. A long snout, sharp ears, and a set of yellowed fangs that glinted as it snarled. I couldn't breathe. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if studying me, then took a slow, deliberate step forward. That snapped me out of it. Shaking, I drew an arrow and let it fly. The shot was rushed, and it only grazed the thing's shoulder. It let out a roar so loud it seemed to shake the trees. I stumbled backward, my lantern swinging wildly and casting eerie shadows. I reached for another arrow, but my hands were trembling too much to notch it properly. The wolfman advanced again, faster this time, closing the gap between us in a few strides. I tripped over a root and fell hard, my bow clattering to the ground. As I scrambled to pick it up, I realized the creature had stopped. It stood there, just feet away, towering over me with those piercing amber eyes locked onto mine. I could hear its breathing, deep, ragged, almost human. It tilted its head again, like it was deciding what to do with me. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Then, without warning, it let out a howl that seemed to shake the entire forest. The sound was so piercing, so otherworldly, that I instinctively covered my ears. When I looked up, it was gone. Vanished into the darkness as if it had never been there. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen and shaking, before I finally found the strength to get up. I grabbed my bow and ran, not caring about the trail, just desperate to get back to my truck. Every snap of a branch behind me made me jump, but when I finally reached the parking lot, the forest was eerily quiet again. The next morning, against my better judgment, I went back to the spot with a buddy. We found tracks, huge clawed impressions in the mud, spaced in a way that suggested something walking on 2 legs. My arrow was embedded in a tree, bent like it had hit something hard before ricocheting off. When I told my story to some of the old-timers at a bait shop nearby, they didn't laugh. One of them just nodded. "You saw the beast of DeSoto," he said matter-of-factly. "Been around these woods longer than any of us. Some say it's cursed, others say it's a guardian of the forest. Either way, you're lucky it let you walk out." I haven't gone back to that part of the forest since. Even now, all these years later, I still hear that howl in my dreams. And sometimes on quiet nights, I swear I can feel those amber eyes watching me from the shadows. I've seen strange things in my time as a search and rescue officer, but nothing like what I encountered on October 15th, 2018. That night changed everything I thought I knew about the forest and what might live in its shadows. The call came just after sunset. A hiker had texted for help before losing signal. The coordinates placed him deep in the Mark Twain National Forest, near an area avoided by locals. I didn't have time for superstitions or ghost stories. My job was to find the man and bring him back alive. The drizzle had just stopped when I arrived at the trailhead. The forest was wet and quiet. Too quiet. Normally, I'd hear owls or the rustle of small animals. Instead, there was only the sound of my boots crunching through damp leaves. As I moved deeper into the woods, my radio began to crackle with static. I tapped it a few times, but the noise only got worse. That's when I noticed the smell, a sour, earthy musk that turned my stomach. It clung to the air like an invisible fog. I swept my flashlight across the underbrush. That's when I saw them. Two yellow eyes glowing back at me from the darkness. They blinked once, and then the creature stepped into view. At first I thought it was a large cougar, but I quickly realized it was something far stranger. The beast had 6 legs, its sleek, muscular body rippling under jet-black fur streaked with muddy brown. Its face was feline but grotesque, with unnaturally wide jaws and teeth that glinted like shards of glass. It stood at least 4 feet tall at the shoulder, and the way it moved, silent and predatory, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The creature growled, a deep rumble that seemed to shake the ground beneath my boots. My flashlight wavered as my hands trembled. When I shined the beam directly on it, the beast's lips curled back, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Then it let out a scream, piercing, almost human. The sound cut through me, freezing me in place. I tried to scare it off, shouting and waving my flashlight, but the beast didn't budge. It crouched low, its 6 legs coiling like springs, and I realized it was preparing to pounce. My hand moved instinctively toward the pistol on my hip, though I wasn't sure a bullet would stop something like this. And then, just as it tensed to leap, a sound echoed through the forest, a high-pitched whistle, clear and sharp. The wampus beast froze, its head snapping toward the source of the sound. For a moment, it stood there, listening. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the shadows, moving so fast I couldn't track it with my flashlight. The forest fell silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the beast was still nearby, watching. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, following the GPS toward the hiker's last known location. About half a mile later, I found him huddled under a rock outcropping. He was shaken, but unharmed. He hadn't seen or heard the creature, though he admitted feeling like something was following him all night. The next morning, I returned to the area with a colleague. In daylight, the forest felt less menacing, but we quickly found evidence that confirmed what I'd seen. Deep claw marks gouged into a tree, far too large for any cougar, and 6-toed paw prints embedded in the muddy ground. We measured the tracks. They were nearly twice the size of a mountain lion's. Since that night, I've tried to learn more about the wampus beast. According to Cherokee legend, it's either a cursed woman or a supernatural guardian of the forest. Some say it's a protector, others call it a predator. All I know is what I saw and heard. The whistle still haunts me. I don't know who or what blew it that night. Was it another person? Something else? Whatever it was, it saved my life. These days I don't go into that part of the forest alone, and every time I hear a distant whistle, I wonder if it's calling the beast or keeping it at bay. It was a damp, miserable evening in September when I found myself patrolling Flathead National Forest alone. The air was heavy with the scent of wet pine needles. and a thin drizzle had been falling since late afternoon. The trail ahead was dark, even with the ATV's headlights cutting through the mist. I was 5 miles deep, ensuring campers weren't breaking the fire restrictions when I noticed something unusual. At first I thought it was an animal, a faint glint in the beam of my headlights, a reflection, maybe from eyes. I slowed the ATV, squinting ahead. It wasn't moving like a deer or an elk. The motion was hesitant, almost deliberate, as if it was watching me as closely as I was watching it. I brought the ATV to a stop and leaned forward, my heart beginning to thud in my chest. That's when it stepped into the trail. At first I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, easily 7 feet, but hunched, its limbs unnaturally long and spindly. The skin was dark, almost black, and textured like wet tree bark. Its face, it didn't have eyes, at least none that I could see. Instead, its head tilted slightly as though it was studying me. The air seemed to grow heavier, the forest quieter, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Then it made a sound, a low, guttural clicking that seemed to vibrate in my chest. I froze, my fingers tightening on the handlebars of the ATV. Slowly, I reached for the flashlight clipped to my belt. The beam pierced the darkness, landing squarely on the creature. It flinched, recoiling slightly, but instead of fleeing, it crouched low, its long fingers flexing like a cat ready to pounce. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice trembling. The creature's head twitched at the sound, and then it did something that made my blood run cold. It mimicked me, not my words, but the tone of my voice. A guttural, distorted version of my shout echoed back at me, almost mocking. I could feel the adrenaline surging as I killed the ATV's engine, hoping the silence might give me a better sense of its movements. But the creature didn't retreat. Instead, it began to circle me, staying just out of reach of the flashlight's beam. Each time I swung the light toward it, it hissed and shifted direction. Its movements were unnervingly silent, as though it were gliding over the ground. My breathing was shallow, my mind racing. I needed to do something, anything, to break the stalemate. My hand found a rock on the trail, and without thinking, I hurled it at the creature. The rock struck its torso with a dull, wet thud, and for a brief moment it froze. Then it screamed. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, high-pitched and guttural all at once, a shriek that seemed to echo endlessly through the forest. My knees nearly buckled, but I held my ground, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The creature straightened to its full height, its claws glinting in the faint light, before suddenly retreating into the trees. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, scanning the tree line with the flashlight, my ears straining for any sound. When nothing came, I finally forced myself to move, fumbling to restart the ATV. The roar of the engine was the only sound as I sped back to the station, my heart pounding the entire way. When I reached safety, I reported what I'd seen to my supervisor. He gave me a skeptical look, then shrugged it off as a misidentified bear. I didn't argue. I wasn't sure I could put what I'd seen into words that made sense. But the next day, when I went back to the site with another ranger, we found evidence I couldn't explain. Deep gouges were carved into a tree near where I'd stopped, far too high for any known animal. A week later, while reviewing the audio from my radio, which had been on during the encounter, I heard faint clicking and chittering, unmistakable and chilling. I didn't need to convince myself it was real. I knew what I'd seen and what I'd heard. Locals spoke of a forest guardian they called the Hollow Stalker. They said it preyed on those who stayed too long in its territory or ventured too far from the trails. I'd always dismissed it as campfire nonsense, but now I'm not so sure. I still patrol Flathead National Forest, but I've made some changes. I carry extra gear, avoid solo patrols at night, and always stay on the marked trails. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the wind dies and the forest is still, I think I hear it. The faint clicking just beyond the edge of the light. I had always prided myself on being a man of science. As a wildlife biologist, my job was to catalog and understand the natural world, not to entertain tales of monsters or ghostly apparitions. That's why when the locals around Platte River State Park warned me about the winged shadow that haunted the area, I politely nodded but dismissed it. I was there to study bats, not ghost stories. It was late October and the crisp autumn air had settled over the park. The night was cool, with a faint mist hovering just above the ground. My flashlight cut through the darkness as I followed the trail to a small clearing near the river. The area was perfect for setting up my ultrasonic detector, which I used to track bat echolocation calls. The forest around me was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. As I powered up my equipment, I noticed something odd. My flashlight flickered briefly. I tapped it, thinking it was just a loose connection, but it steadied again. Shaking off the unease, I focused on my work. The detector emitted soft clicks and pulses as it picked up faint bat calls. I made notes in my journal, my breath visible in the chill air. Then I heard it, the hum. At first it was faint, like the low vibration of power lines. But there were no power lines here, just trees and the dark expanse of the park. The sound grew louder, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through my chest. I turned off the detector thinking it might be malfunctioning, but the hum persisted. The forest had fallen completely silent. No owls, no crickets, no rustling leaves. Just the hum. I scanned the clearing with my flashlight. That's when I saw them. Two glowing red orbs reflecting back at me from the tree line. They were too large to belong to any animal I knew and too high off the ground. My heart skipped a beat as the orbs blinked and shifted, moving closer. A shadow emerged from the darkness, tall and thin. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was over 7 feet tall, its body covered in what looked like dark, leathery skin that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Massive wings unfolded from its back, spanning at least 12 feet, their edges jagged and sharp. But it was the eyes, those unblinking blood-red eyes, that pinned me in place. It screeched, a high-pitched, piercing sound that sent my flashlight tumbling from my hand. My ears rang as I dropped to my knees, instinctively covering my head. When I dared to look up, the creature was airborne, its enormous wings stirring up a gust of wind that flattened the grass around me. It circled the clearing slowly, its glowing eyes never leaving me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt like prey, frozen under the predator's gaze. The hum grew louder as the creature descended, its massive form blotting out the faint moonlight. It hovered just above me, close enough that I could see the sharp claws on its talon-like feet and the intricate veins running through its wings. For a moment, it tilted its head as though studying me. Then, with another deafening screech, it ascended sharply, disappearing into the mist above the treetops. The hum faded, and the forest came back to life as if nothing had happened. Crickets chirped, an owl called out in the distance, and my flashlight flickered back on, steady now. I sat there for a long time, too stunned to move. When I finally mustered the courage, I gathered my equipment, hands trembling, and hurried back to the cabin. My mind raced with what I'd seen. It wasn't a bird or a bat or anything I could explain. It was something else, something I couldn't understand. Back in the safety of the cabin, I scribbled down every detail I could remember. The height, the wingspan, the glowing eyes, the hum. I checked my ultrasonic detector's recordings, and sure enough, there was a strange, pulsating frequency that didn't match any known bat calls. In the days that followed, I learned more about the local lore. Rangers and residents spoke of a winged shadow that appeared near the Platte River, often before storms or tragedies. They whispered about its presence being an omen, a warning of danger to come. I didn't know what it was warning me about, but I knew one thing for certain. I had seen the Mothman. Even now, I can't walk those trails without looking over my shoulder. The memory of those glowing eyes, that hum, and the sheer presence of the creature stays with me. I am a man of science, but that night at Platte River made me question everything I thought I knew. I've been a park ranger in Toyabe National Forest for over a decade. I've seen my fair share of strange things, storms that roll in out of nowhere, animals acting oddly. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on October 15th, 2019. The evening started like many others. I was patrolling a remote logging trail after a group of campers reported hearing unearthly howls the night before. The trail was long abandoned, overgrown with weeds and lined by towering pines. The air was damp from a recent rain and twilight was fading into darkness. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom and my breath came out in white puffs in the chilly air. The forest was alive with sound at first. Crickets chirped, frogs croaked near a nearby creek, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at wildlife moving through the underbrush. But as I reached a bend in the trail, everything stopped. The stillness was so sudden it felt oppressive, like stepping into a vacuum. Even the creek seemed to hush. My instincts prickled. Something wasn't right. Then came the smell. A pungent, musky odor hit me like a wall, thick and cloying, unlike anything I'd ever smelled before. It was a mix of wet dog and rotting leaves, with a metallic edge that made my stomach churn. I swept my flashlight over the ground and froze when I saw the footprints. They were massive. Each print was at least twice the size of my boot, with clear impressions of toes. The depth suggested something incredibly heavy, far beyond what any bear in the area could produce. My pulse quickened and I crouched down to get a better look, snapping a photo with my phone. The prints led deeper into the woods, off the trail. Against my better judgment, I followed them. I hadn't gone more than 20 yards when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a hulking figure partially obscured by a cluster of pine trees. I stopped dead in my tracks, my flashlight trembling in my grip as I angled the beam toward it. The light caught amber eyes glowing faintly in the dark, staring straight at me. My breath hitched. The creature stepped into full view and my heart nearly stopped. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they looked unnatural. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur, matted and wet from the damp air. The face was what got me the most, eerily human, with a flat nose, deep-set eyes, and a powerful jawline. It looked intelligent, almost aware, as though it understood exactly what it was looking at. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It took a step toward me, the ground crunching under its enormous feet. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, locked in place by those glowing eyes. I managed to raise my flashlight higher, illuminating more of its face. It responded by shielding its eyes with one massive hand and letting out a sound I will never forget. A cross between a howl and a roar, primal and deafening. The force of it sent adrenaline surging through my veins and I stumbled back a step, fumbling for the radio strapped to my shoulder. Before I could speak into it, the creature turned and bolted into the woods. Its speed was astonishing, especially for something so large. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving only the sound of breaking branches and the faint echo of its howl. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. Finally, I forced myself to move, retracing my steps back to the trailhead. Along the way, I found a branch with several strands of dark hair snagged on it. I collected them with trembling fingers, stuffing them into a small evidence bag I carried for work. When I reached my truck, I sat there for a long time, staring into the darkness, half expecting those amber eyes to appear again. Eventually, I radioed my supervisor and gave a vague report about unusual activity in the area. I didn't mention what I'd actually seen. Who would believe me? In the days that followed, I sent the hair sample to a lab, but the results came back inconclusive. The footprints I photographed were dismissed by some as a prank or misinterpretation, though no one could explain the size or depth. I've kept the location to myself, quietly recommending the area be marked off limits for safety reasons. Even now, I can't walk those trails without feeling a heavy sense of unease, as though I'm being watched. And I'll never forget those amber eyes or the roar that shook the forest. Something is out there, something that doesn't want to be found, and I have no intention of looking for it again. The air had an eerie weight to it that afternoon in White Mountain National Forest, a heavy stillness that made the rustle of my boots against the leaf-covered ground sound unnaturally loud. I was deep into my research, cataloging fungi and soil samples for a paper I was writing. My work kept me so focused that at first I didn't even notice how quiet it had gotten. When I did, I froze. The usual chorus of the forest, birds calling, squirrels scampering, the faint drone of insects, was gone. I straightened, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. There was no sound except the soft whisper of the breeze through the trees, but even that felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to be there. I heard it then, a rustling noise, low and deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. It wasn't the wind. This was different, methodical, something alive. I pushed through the undergrowth toward the sound, cautiously stepping over fallen branches and mossy rocks. As I moved closer, I saw it. A tree, but not like any tree I'd ever seen. It was enormous, its bark gnarled and blackened like charred wood. Its branches twisted unnaturally, ending in thick, thorn-tipped tendrils that hung like dormant snakes. But the most unsettling feature was a hollow at its base, a dark, gaping maw that pulsed faintly. It wasn't just a hollow, it was moving. I couldn't help myself. I moved closer. I fumbled with my phone, starting a video as I stepped toward the tree. My scientific instincts were kicking in, pushing back the warning bells screaming in my head. This thing, whatever it was, shouldn't exist. A vine uncoiled from one of the branches, dragging itself across the ground toward me. It didn't move like a plant swaying in the breeze. It moved like a snake stalking prey. The tip brushed against the soil near my boots, and I jumped back as it left behind a trail of sizzling, acrid-smelling residue. I raised my phone again, this time with the flash on. As the bright light illuminated the tree, it reacted violently. The hollow at its base opened wider, revealing jagged, bark-like teeth. The tendrils lashed out, one of them wrapping around a young sapling nearby and crushing it with a deafening crack. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding as I realized that the thing wasn't just alive, it was aware. I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my face as I sprinted, my boots skidding on loose leaves and hidden roots. Behind me I could hear it, tendrils snapping, roots shifting, that deep guttural creak of wood groaning under strain. The sound of it chasing me made my stomach churn with terror. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally dared to look back, it was gone. Or rather, it had stopped. The tree stood still as if it had never moved. Its tendrils retracted and its gaping hollow closed. It looked like just another ancient, weathered tree in the forest. But I knew better. By the time I reached the ranger station, I was shaking so badly I could barely explain what had happened. The ranger on duty, a middle-aged man who clearly thought I'd lost my mind, agreed to go back with me. When we returned to the spot, the tree was there, but it didn't move. It looked completely inert. My notebook was still on the ground where I'd dropped it, but the pages were soaked in some kind of acidic substance, most of them illegible. The crushed sapling and scorched soil were the only evidence of what I'd seen. The ranger didn't say much on the way back, but when I pressed him, he mentioned old local legends. Stories about the Maw, a man-eating spirit that lived in the trees and lured hikers to their doom. He claimed it was just folklore, but his voice carried an edge of something else. Fear, maybe, or doubt. For weeks after, I had nightmares about that hollow maw, gaping wider and wider until it swallowed me whole. Even now, I can't bring myself to return to that part of the forest. The footage I took was blurry, and the audio of the guttural growl wasn't enough to convince anyone else. Some of my colleagues think I misidentified a natural phenomenon or let my imagination get the better of me, but I know the truth. The maw is still out there waiting, and I'll never go back to find it. The rain had settled into a persistent drizzle, enough to soak my jacket and make every step a slippery hazard. The wildfire had been contained earlier that day, but smoldering embers in the underbrush meant someone had to patrol the perimeter overnight. That someone was me. It was just past 2:30 a.m. and the woods were too quiet. Normally, I'd hear the chirp of crickets, the occasional owl, or the rustle of a nocturnal animal in the brush. But now, there was nothing. Just the soft patter of rain on burned leaves and the occasional drip from the charred canopy above. I paused, my flashlight scanning the blackened trunks. My breath hung in the damp air. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement on the trunk of a scorched maple, a shadow. Not mine, and not from my flashlight. It moved like liquid smoke, twisting unnaturally, though I couldn't find anything that could be casting it. I took a step forward, my boots squelching in the wet ground. The shadow seemed to retreat, slipping behind the tree as if it had a will of its own. "Hello?" My voice was swallowed by the silence. The radio on my hip crackled, static breaking through. I frowned and adjusted the dial. "Team, do you copy?" Nothing, just more static. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again, this time larger, more defined. It glided along the ground and up the trunk of another tree, forming into a tall, humanoid shape. Its head was smooth and featureless, and its limbs stretched unnaturally long, tapering into wisps of shadow. It didn't move like a person. It floated, as if the laws of gravity didn't apply. I froze, gripping my flashlight tighter. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The beam of my flashlight cut through the creature like it wasn't even there, and yet its shadow remained. Dark, solid, impossible. The thing turned its head toward me, or at least I thought it did. It had no face, no eyes, but I felt its attention, sharp and unnerving. My chest tightened. My breathing grew shallow. Every instinct screamed for me to run, yet my legs refused to move. It started gliding toward me. I fumbled for my radio again. "Team, come in, there's something here." The words came out frantic, but all I got in response was a shrill burst of static. My flashlight flickered and the shadow creature loomed closer. Inches from my face, it stopped. The cold that emanated from it was unlike anything I'd ever felt, as if the warmth of the world had been sucked away. My hand found the flare clipped to my belt. Desperate, I struck it. The flare hissed to life, casting an angry red glow that painted the forest in harsh light. The shadow recoiled, its form warping and twisting as if the light was tearing it apart. It shattered into fragments, darting away into the trees like scraps of burnt paper caught in the wind. I collapsed to one knee, clutching the flare like a lifeline. The oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the faint sound of rain and my own ragged breathing. My radio crackled again, this time with a voice. "You okay? What's going on?" It took me a moment to find my voice. I need backup. Now." 15 minutes later, my team arrived. By then, the forest looked normal again, as if nothing had happened. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but their skeptical expressions told me they didn't believe me. Still, they humored me, sweeping the area with flashlights. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of a creature. But there were scorch marks. The trees in the area where the creature had cornered me bore strange, irregular burns, as though something had pressed against them with intense heat. My teammates chalked it up to lingering fire damage, but I knew better. I haven't taken a night patrol since that night. The encounter has stayed with me, creeping into my dreams, where the shadow looms again, tilting its head as if it recognizes me. Locals call it the Shade, a legend tied to the disappearances of hikers and hunters over the years. I don't know if I believe in the stories, but I do know this: some things are better left alone. When the woods go quiet and the shadows start to move, it's best to leave. Because not everything in the dark is willing to let you leave alive. Twilight fell over Santa Fe National Forest as I trudged deeper into its winding trails, my camera bag digging into my shoulder. I'd hiked farther than usual tonight, chasing the perfect clearing for a shot of the Milky Way. The crisp autumn air carried the tang of pine and damp earth, and the last light of day painted the trees in shades of gold and shadow. It should have been peaceful, but something felt off. The forest was too quiet. The rhythmic chatter of crickets had vanished, replaced by a strange, low hum. At first I thought it might be wind funneling through the trees, but the sound wasn't natural. It had a metallic resonance vibrating faintly in my chest. I paused, turning my head to locate its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I found a small clearing and set down my bag, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. The forest's silence wrapped around me as I adjusted my tripod, the hum still faint but persistent. As I aligned the shot, the hum grew louder, deeper, resonating with an almost hypnotic rhythm. My hand froze on the camera's shutter release. Something was watching me. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. That's when I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the clearing's edge. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its body translucent and shimmering like water disturbed by a gentle breeze. Its form seemed human at first glance, but wrong in every way that mattered. Its limbs were too long, ending in claw-like hands that flexed and twitched unnaturally. Its face, or lack thereof, was the most unsettling part. 2 glowing slits where eyes should have been stared at me, unblinking. The hum grew deafening, vibrating through my chest like the pulse of an unseen force. I couldn't move. My legs felt anchored to the forest floor as the creature tilted its head, studying me with an eerie, deliberate stillness. My heart thundered in my ears, but some primal instinct made me reach for my camera. I raised it slowly, snapping photo after photo. The creature flinched slightly at the sound of the shutter, its glowing eyes narrowing. It took a step closer, my breath caught. The hum shifted, modulating into a series of tones, high, low, rhythmic, almost like speech. Was it trying to communicate? My brain screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I stood frozen, the camera still clutched in my hands. Suddenly, the creature emitted a sharp, high-pitched trill. It wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation, sharp and invasive, like a blade cutting through my thoughts. The spell broke. I stumbled backward, my tripod crashing to the ground with a metallic clang. The creature's head snapped toward the noise, and in a blur of motion, it vanished into the trees. One moment it was there. The next it was gone, swallowed by the forest. The hum reached a crescendo, vibrating so intensely it felt like my body might shatter, and then silence. The forest came alive again as if a switch had been flipped. Crickets chirped, wind rustled the leaves. The distant hoot of an owl echoed through the trees. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I grabbed my gear, my hands trembling, and bolted for the trail. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf sent my heart racing as I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see those glowing slits watching me from the shadows. I made it to my car just as darkness swallowed the forest. My breath came in ragged gasps as I locked the doors and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My mind raced, replaying every detail of what I'd just seen. Had I imagined it? The distorted hum still echoed faintly in my ears, a cruel reminder of its reality. At home, I examined the photos. They were warped as though the creature's presence had bent the very fabric of the image. In one frame, faint traces of its shimmering form could be seen, tall, translucent, otherworldly. On a whim, I returned to the clearing the next day. Deep claw marks scored the bark of a tree where the creature had stood, long and deliberate. When I told my story to a local shop owner, an elderly man nearby overheard and shook his head. La sombra velada, he said. The veiled shadow. It's been in these woods long before us. They say it guards something ancient, something no one's meant to find. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest. Sometimes late at night I hear the hum again, faint, almost imperceptible, outside my cabin. The distorted photos sit untouched in a drawer, proof of something I'll never fully understand. The forest still calls to me, but I'm not sure I have the courage to answer. Whatever I encountered that night wasn't just watching, it was warning. I remember the night vividly. It was October 15th, 2016, the kind of cold, moonlit evening that makes you feel every nerve in your body. As a Navy SEAL, I'd been sent into Rockefeller State Park Preserve for a solo navigation training exercise. It was a routine task: orient myself, mark key landmarks, and finish by setting up camp near an old cave system I'd studied on the map. Simple, straightforward. At least it should have been. The air felt different as I neared the cave. The forest, which had been alive with the sounds of wind and owls, suddenly fell silent. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet, but the oppressive, unnatural kind that makes your instincts scream. I stopped and scanned the area. My flashlight swept across the rocky trail, illuminating a set of prints in the damp soil. They were massive, humanoid, but distorted, clawed with a stride too long for anything I knew. I knelt to get a closer look, my breath visible in the cold air. Whatever made these tracks wasn't human. Every training instinct I had told me to fall back, but curiosity got the better of me. Adjusting my pack and gripping my flashlight tighter, I stepped into the cave. The air inside was damp and cold, carrying the faint metallic scent of wet stone. My footsteps echoed softly as I moved deeper, shining the beam of light ahead. At first I saw nothing, just jagged walls and stalactites dripping water. Then I saw movement, a shadow that seemed to shift just beyond the edge of my flashlight's range. And then I saw it. The creature rose slowly from a crouched position at the back of the cave. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with unnaturally long limbs ending in jagged claws. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, with patches of moss-like growth along its chest and arms. 2 glowing amber eyes locked onto mine, radiating an intelligence that sent a chill down my spine. Its face was gaunt, the mouth stretching into an unnatural grin lined with jagged yellow teeth. It didn't attack immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, letting out a guttural clicking noise that echoed through the cave. My heart pounded as I slowly drew my survival knife, the blade feeling small and inadequate in my grip. The creature moved then, faster than anything I'd ever seen, skittering along the cave wall like a spider. I barely had time to track it with my flashlight before it dropped silently onto the ground a few feet away. Its mouth opened wider, letting out a low growl that seemed to vibrate in my chest. And then, it lunged. I dove to the side, the creature's claws scraping against the stone where I'd just been. Rolling to my feet, I slashed out with my knife, catching its arm. The blade bit into its flesh, but not deeply. It was like cutting into hardened leather. The creature shrieked, a sound so loud and guttural that I nearly dropped my knife. It retreated slightly, its glowing eyes narrowing as it studied me. For a moment we stood there, predator and prey locked in a silent standoff. Then it charged again. This time I was ready. I aimed my flashlight directly at its face, the beam catching it in the eyes. The creature let out another shriek, stumbling back and clawing at the air. Seizing the opportunity, I bolted for the cave entrance, my boots pounding against the rocky floor. The sound of its roars followed me, echoing down the tunnel, but I didn't stop until I was outside, bathed in the cold, safe light of the moon. I turned back just in time to see the creature's glowing eyes fade into the shadows of the cave. The rest of the night I didn't dare sleep. I found a cluster of trees far from the cave and set up a defensive position, knife in hand, scanning the forest for any sign of pursuit. None came. When the sun rose, I made my way back to civilization, my mind still racing with what I'd seen. Later, I reported the encounter to a park ranger, careful not to sound unhinged. He listened, then shrugged. "Probably just a bear," he said at first, but when I described the glowing eyes, his demeanor shifted. He told me about an old legend, the Hollow Watcher, a creature said to guard the caves of Rockefeller Preserve. There had been reports before, he admitted, but no one ever took them seriously. I haven't been back to that cave since. The footprints I photographed and the memory of that creature's injured arm are the only evidence I have. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of its glowing amber eyes and the guttural clicks echoing through the dark. Whatever the Hollow Watcher was, it reminded me that the world is still full of mysteries, some better left unexplored. The wind wind carried a chill that evening as I packed up my tools in the heart of the Nantahala National Forest. Twilight was settling in, and the woods around me seemed to close in tighter with each passing minute. The air smelled of wet leaves and freshly cut pine, and my hands ached from a long day of swinging my axe. I wanted nothing more than to load up my truck and call it a day. But as I stood there, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The chatter of birds and the occasional rustle of small animals disappeared, replaced by an unsettling silence. That was when I smelled it, a rancid, musky odor like wet fur mixed with something rotten. My first thought was a bear, but I'd been in these woods long enough to know better. Bears didn't make the hair on the back of my neck stand up like this. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and far too loud to belong to anything small. Crunch. Crunch. Each step sounded closer than the last. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but my feet refused to move. It stepped into the clearing, and I'll never forget the sight. The thing was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in coarse, dark brown hair that glistened slightly in the fading light. Its long arms swung low, and its broad chest rose and fell with deep, measured breaths. But it was the face that truly shook me. It was flat, with a wide nose and piercing, intelligent eyes that locked onto mine. I couldn't tell if it was curious or angry, but those eyes pinned me in place. I reached for my axe without thinking, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. The creature didn't charge. It didn't even growl at first. It just stood there, watching me. Then, as if testing me, it began to circle, its massive feet crushing leaves and twigs with every step. My heart pounded like a drum, and I could barely breathe. Finally, it stopped. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound so deep I felt it in my chest. It wasn't just a warning. It was a statement. I didn't know what it was saying, but I got the message loud and clear. This was its territory. I didn't dare move until it stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the trees. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to grab my gear and head for the truck. The forest seemed to come alive again as I walked, with birds chirping and leaves rustling. I almost let myself believe it was over. Then I heard it again, those heavy footsteps following me from just beyond the tree line. I quickened my pace, gripping my axe tighter. Every step I took, it matched. My chest tightened as I fought the urge to run, knowing that whatever this thing was, it could catch me in seconds if it wanted to. When I couldn't take it anymore, I spun around. It was there, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, it let out a roar, deep, primal, and deafening. The sound echoed through the trees and rattled my bones. For a moment I thought it might charge, but instead it turned and vanished into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I ran the rest of the way to my truck, threw my gear in the bed, and sped out of there as fast as the rutted road would let me. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those intelligent eyes staring back at me or heard that unearthly roar. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me, and I went back. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof for myself that it had really happened. In the clearing, I found a single footprint pressed deep into the mud. It was nearly 18 inches long, with toes that looked disturbingly human. I took a Polaroid photo of it, but I haven't shown it to many people. Most wouldn't believe me anyway, I thought. It's been years since that night, but I haven't set foot in that part of the forest again. Others have reported strange sightings and sounds, but none of them seemed to stick around long enough to get a good look. I don't blame them. Whatever I saw that night, it wasn't just an animal. It was something more, something that doesn't belong in this world, or maybe something we just don't understand yet. Either way, the forest belongs to it, and I've learned to respect that. Sometimes the best thing you can do is leave a mystery unsolved. It was a cold November afternoon, the kind where the light snow muffles every sound and makes the world feel eerily still. I was trekking through the rugged badlands of Theodore Roosevelt National Park, rifle slung over my shoulder, searching for mule deer. The silence felt heavier than usual, almost unnatural. I chalked it up to the snow and pressed on, determined to reach the ridge before dusk. As I crested the hill, the first thing I noticed was the wind, or rather the sudden lack of it. Moments ago, it had been whistling through the barren trees, but now everything was deathly still. Even the chirping of birds and the distant howls of coyotes had ceased. I stopped and scanned the valley below, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me. That's when I saw it, a massive shadow sweeping across the snow-covered ground. I froze, heart pounding, and instinctively looked up, expecting to see a large bird or maybe a low-flying plane. But the sky was empty, just a dull gray expanse stretching endlessly overhead. Then it appeared. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. From behind a rocky outcrop floated a massive, disembodied head. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, or could have imagined. The thing was enormous, at least 5 feet in diameter. Its gray, leathery skin was stretched tight over grotesque features, and its eyes burned like hot coals. Its mouth was a gaping void filled with jagged, blackened teeth, and long, stringy hair floated around it like smoke. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to breathe. The creature hovered a few feet off the ground, its ember-like eyes locked onto mine. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. Then it growled, a deep, guttural sound that reverberated through my chest. I felt the kind of fear that leaves no room for thought, only raw, primal terror. My hands moved on their own, gripping my rifle tighter. I wasn't sure what good it would do against something like this, but it was the only comfort I had. The flying head began to float closer, its mouth twisting into what could only be described as a snarl. My legs felt like lead, my breath frozen in my chest. All I could do was watch as it approached, exuding an oppressive aura of malice. Suddenly, it let out a scream, high-pitched and unearthly, like the sound of metal scraping against bone. The sound pierced through me, shaking me out of my paralysis. Without thinking, I raised my rifle and fired. The crack of the shot echoed across the valley, but the creature didn't react the way I expected. Instead of flinching or recoiling, it simply vanished. One moment it was there, looming over me, and the next it was gone, leaving only a gust of wind in its wake. The silence returned, heavier than before. I stumbled backward, my hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the rifle. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my legs felt like jelly. I had to get out of there. I turned and half ran, half slid down the ridge, my boots slipping on the icy snow. My only thought was to reach my truck and get as far away as possible. When I finally reached the vehicle, I threw myself inside and locked the doors, as if that flimsy barrier could protect me from whatever I had just encountered. I sat there for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel and staring out into the twilight, expecting to see the flying head swooping toward me. But nothing came. Eventually, I started the engine and drove away, my hands still shaking. For days, I couldn't get the image of that thing out of my head. Its burning eyes haunted my dreams, and every time the wind died or the woods fell silent, I felt its presence again. I told a few friends about what I'd seen, but they just laughed it off, saying I must have been tired or hallucinating. Deep down, though, I knew the truth. That thing was real. A week later, I overheard an old-timer at a diner talking about local legends. He mentioned something called the Flying Head, an avenging spirit said to haunt the Badlands. He claimed it was a harbinger of doom, appearing to those who had somehow trespassed against the land. The story chilled me to the bone. To this day, I avoid hunting alone, especially in that part of the park. I'll never forget the way it looked at me, as if it could see right through my skin to my soul. And I'll never stop wondering, did I scare it off with my shot, or did it leave on its own terms? If it left, will it ever come back? Most stories end with answers. At True Cryptid Archives, they usually end with more questions. If you've got a theory, drop it below. Like the video, subscribe for more field reports, and ring the bell so you're not the last to know when the next file goes live.